Cimo. What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my ban list predictions for the June 2020 ban list. This is a bit weird because we don't necessarily know if we're getting a ban list. We should be getting one, but you know, with the fact that there's been no in-person events, it's a little bit difficult to gauge. Now, I want to make the argument in this video that we should get a ban list because let's say we return back to normal to any degree, well, we kind of already have the format figured out, and so I don't really think it would make sense or really get a lot of players excited knowing that they have to look forward to Adamantipator or Eldritch format for the next 3 months. That just doesn't make sense in my eyes, but nonetheless, I want to bring to you guys my ban list predictions for this upcoming list. This might be one of the most difficult ban list predictions I've ever had to create, and you'll see why, and I'll go through that thought process as we get into it. But before we get into it, if you're looking to compete in some online tournaments, we have the Pro Play Tour Weekend Championship taking place this weekend and every weekend while we are under quarantine, with some incredibly generous cash prize offerings for the winners. So click the link down below in the description to register because it's a great way to keep up your skills even while you're staying at home. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into these predictions. I'm going to start with the ban cards as I typically do, and if there's one card that should make its appearance on every single person's ban list predictions, it is Block Dragon. Yes, Block Dragon kind of being the focal point of Adamantipator. Sure, Adamantipator's just fine without Block Dragon, but this is the card that kind of takes it over the edge. The fact that this card is not a hard once per turn when it comes to its resurrection effect means it can be abused in multiple ways, but then the first time it is sent to the graveyard, guess what? You are going to be able to basically go +3 off of it, which is absurd. You can then search every Adamantipator card to your heart's content and keep comboing off, building these incredibly powerful boards. If you remove Block Dragon from the equation, I think Adamantipator is still a very respectable contender, but it's not going to be nearly as powerful as it is now. Think where Adamantipator would be if it didn't have those 3 extra monsters to work with, which then cascade into more advantage because then each of the Adamantipator monsters you get can then excavate and special summon something else. So it's really like turning 3 into sometimes 6 depending on what you search, and that's what makes this deck so absurd. Block Dragon not only is good during your turn, but also your opponent's. When you're able to link off Block Dragon with cards like Masquerena and then trigger that effect during your opponent's turn, regenerating all of those resources that you lost on the previous turn, vomiting out all your hand onto the board. Again, this is kind of reminiscent of me of like Fairy Tail Snow and Thunder Dragon when they were able to do those effects during the opponent's turn and just generate twice the amount of advantage that they were supposed to. Yeah, definitely degenerate, and I think this is the card that if there's a card that should be hit, Block Dragon is one of them. So moving on from Block Dragon, this is where it gets a little bit dicey, and candidly, we might spend about half of the video in this particular section because there's so much to cover here. So a lot of people want to make the argument that Crystron Needle Fiber should get banned, and frankly, I'm one of them. I definitely feel that it is in the camp that this card is one of the most powerful cards ever created, and as we've seen, even though it hasn't seen actual physical play, this card is a format warping card, and the longer this card continues to persist, the worse it is going to get because people are going to continue to find new ways to abuse it, and it's really going to all centralize around Needle Fiber. There's really no working around it. Some people might make the argument that, oh, Jet Synchron could get hit, and yeah, you may be right, but there's so many other cards in the game that are effectively Jet Synchron, which means it's a card that is a tuner that can then like self-resurrect itself. So there's basically like 5 to 10 other cards that can be Jet Synchron. It's just that Jet Synchron's kind of like the best at what it does, and that's why people play it. Not to mention it's searchable via tuning, so that means it's like you're playing 6 Jet Synchrons, which is pretty nice. So it's like, yeah, you could hit Jet Synchron, but does that really accomplish anything? No, not really. And I think the biggest problem here is that like hitting Jet Synchron seems like the Konami thing to do, and I really want to state that here, that this video is pretty much geared towards not necessarily what I want to happen, but what I think will happen, and I've taken that into account significantly here, and so that's why I don't have Halifibrax on the banned cards list. But then like, what do you really do, right? Again, they could hit Jet Synchron, and I think if there is a card to hit, it's probably gonna be Jet, but like, again, it doesn't solve the problem. You could look at some other cards as well, like maybe Mecha Phantom Beast O-Lion. That's one of the token producers that's being abused, but O-Lion's getting a reprint in Battles of Legends Armageddon. What about Mecha Phantom Beast Auroradon? This card summons 3 tokens and then allows you to get to your O-Lion and continue extending your plays, but this card came out in the same set as Hallie-Fibrax, so it's like, if you make the justification for not banning Hallie-Fibrax because it's too new, then you can't ban Auroradon. Well, what about Linkross? Linkross is yet another card that summons tokens that can just be easily abused. But Linkross, at the time of recording this video, isn't even technically legal in the American TCG yet because Eternity Code is only technically legal in Europe due to coronavirus, and we're not supposed to have Linkross even in North America for another week. So, like, how do you win here? Like, it seems like there's no solution, and whatever you do, because they don't want to hit cards because they're too new, they don't want to hit cards because they've never seen the light of physical competitive play, and they don't want to hit cards because they want people to buy their product because ultimately they are a business at the end of the day. So how do we do this, right? How are we going to navigate this particular situation? So I think at the very least, if they're going to hit something, Jet Synchron's going to get banned. Even though that is not the correct answer, I think it's going to make its way onto the ban list solely due to the fact that it is pretty much the card that's enabling everything, and people are just going to move on and do other things. So for my banned cards, I have Block Dragon and Jet Synchron. Another card I want to put on here is Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, but the problem with that is, guess what? That's also getting a reprint in Battles of Legend Armageddon, and so I don't think, solely based off that information, that card's going to get touched either, and I don't think locking your opponent out of the extra deck indefinitely is particularly fun in any sense whatsoever, but this is kind of the situation we're cornered in here, and so I'm making these evaluations based off of the information at hand. So this leads us to the limited cards, and so while I don't think Crystron Needle Fiber is going to get banned, I definitely think it's going to get limited. In the OCG, Crystron Needle Fiber is in fact limited, and while that doesn't solve the problem, it's like a short-term solution, right? The fact that people can't use Needle Fiber combos more than once effectively because you have your one Needle Fiber, if it gets negated, then like that's it, there's no way you can do the combo again, or if they do the combo and you break the board, you don't have to fear that your opponent's gonna retaliate and combo you again. So that's kind of like the saving grace here, and I guess if there's like a middle ground, if you really want to call it that, I guess limiting Needle Fiber at least then gives it the ability to see physical play if we do have physical events anytime in the near future, but I guess it's a compromise, right? By extension though, I also think Linkross should go to 1 as well. Now to be fair, Linkross is probably not being played in higher volumes more than 1 than something like Needle Fiber would be, but it's still another card that is able to be abused, and if we still have Hallie-Fibrax for some reason not limited on this upcoming list, then Linkross definitely needs to go to 1, because then otherwise you would be able to enable these combos over and over again. Again, it all centralizes around Needle Fiber, so that's the card that definitely needs to get hit, but if we don't hit it, we have to hit the pieces around it to reduce the power of the combos that Needle Fiber is able to do. So for the time being, we have Needle Fiber at 1 and Linkross at 1. Now, I'm just going to put this out there. We saw in the past with cards like Firewall Dragon that it went from 3 to 1, it didn't matter, and then Firewall ended up getting banned. So Konami, if you're watching this video, which I know you are, just skip the middleman, skip the misery that the players are going to have to go through, and just ban the card, because it's going to be better for the game, it's going to be a lot more exciting, and people are going to be much more incentivized to play your game if you take care of the problem now, instead of waiting until we actually go back to normal. Now, going under the assumption that we're going to have Needle Fiber at 1 and Linkross at 1, that doesn't solve the issue of the format, right? I mean, yeah, Block Dragon's like technically banned too, so like I guess Adamantipator would be in check to a degree, but we still don't know what combos people would be able to come up with, even with Block Dragon getting banned. At the very least, people would just innovate the deck to still be able to just spit out a huge board for you to deal with, but you just wouldn't have Block Dragon for the follow-up or to be able to have this extra level of consistency that the deck really doesn't necessarily need. So I think an interesting workaround here is that rather than like banning any of like the Secret Slayer cards, let's just hit the consistency of both Eldritch and Adamantipator just a little bit, because then it kind of puts these decks in check. And we've already seen there are a few decks that can compete even with these two decks utterly dominating the format. Salamangreat's at the top, Dinosaur's at the top, Orcus is at the top. This makes sense too, because Orcus, they want to sell Mech Knight Girsu, that's an Eternity Code, so to me that makes sense. Also Animador and Archosaur for Dino, so that's another one. So what I think's gonna happen is I think we're gonna see a limitation of Scarlet Sanguine and a limitation of Adamantipator Researcher. Scarlet Sanguine is kind of like the go-to card for this deck. You're not hitting Golden Lord. The deck centralizes around Golden Lord, so that's something that they really can't touch unless they want to absolutely make this deck unplayable. But Scarlet Sanguine's interesting because by having this card limited, you don't have as much ease of accessibility to getting to a card like Golden Lord. You might have to up the count of Black Elixir or White Elixir that you play, so that way you can continuously get to your Golden Lord. And if Eldritch is going to return to a more pure or maybe like a pseudo-hybrid variant like the Invoked or the Lightsworn variant, then you're reducing the consistency of this deck, because even prior to Adamantipator and Eldritch taking over, Eldritch was already like one of the strongest decks of the format before we had the combo iteration whatsoever. So I feel like a slight check on the consistency of this deck might be a solution to allow the other decks to prop themselves up and then allow them to have a fighting chance in a competitive meta. Same thing goes for Adamantipator, right? Again, we don't know what's going to happen if Block Dragon is banned, which it most likely will, but if you just hit Researcher to 1, you still have your Analyzers, you still have your Seekers, you still have Raptor, you still have all the other cards, but you just have only one Researcher. And Researcher is the best one because you just have to control a rock, you don't even have to control an Adamantipator, and so that's why I feel like that's the one that should be hit. But again, the deck is still very playable. I'm not trying to crucify these decks just yet, but I feel that this is a very fair compromise to, again, allow the other decks to kind of not necessarily get pushed up, but allow the top decks to be pushed down to kind of equalize out the format and to see what happens. Now, speaking of Eldritch hybrids, one card that I think in particular is going to get hit is something revolving around the Invoked engine, because let's say that the Banlist does its job and knocks Adamantipator and Eldritch down a notch, then we have to worry about the fact that, oh, well, if Combo Eldritch dies, then people are just going to go back to Invoked Eldritch, which was like the preferred variant before Combo Eldritch existed. Again, I'm not trying to murder these decks outright, but again, just a slight check on their consistency, I think, is the key to success here, and hitting a card like Magical Meltdown, I think, would do the trick. That means you just have less access to Alistair. You still have all your Alistair, so you can do like double Alistair Purgatrio nonsense, which, you know, isn't what it is, but again, that's not like inherently broken. You still have to waste a ton of cards to do that, but nonetheless, reducing the access to Alistair means that the Invoked engine won't be nearly as consistent. Again, we know Rise of the Duelist is coming out. Invoked Dragma is another deck we have to consider, because we're going to be getting that set probably on the eclipse of like when we should be getting the next ban list. So at the very least, I just think a slight check to this engine in particular is probably going to be something we might expect, but who knows? I think this is probably the least likely out of everything we've already discussed. And now for the semi-limits. Longtime fans of the channel know that I absolutely despise the semi-limited list. I just think it doesn't make any sense. Every card on the list can go to either 1 or 3. The fact there's only like 3 cards on it just goes to show how useless it is. First and foremost being ABC Dragon Buster. This is a card that Konami preemptively hit on the last ban list, fearing Master Rule 5 and people that's just like flocking to ABC for some reason. I think they're going to move this card to 2. ABC saw virtually no play going into this last format, and so by putting it to 2, it's nice. People can use the new support out of Eternity Code being Union Driver. They can use the quick play Union Hanger from the Mechanized Madness structure deck. Like, there's a lot of cool ABC support cards that came out, but no one wants to play ABC with 1 Dragon Buster. So let's just up it and see what happens. Again, I don't really think it's going to matter that much. I could say this card could go to 3, but knowing Konami, they're going to be a little bit hesitant and just let it go to 2. And that brings us to the unlimits. I don't really have too many cards here because it's really just moving stuff from the semi-limited list to unlimited. First up is Tour Guide. I mean, Tour Guide virtually saw no play last format, aside from some like very, very obscure strategies that just take advantage of it. But like, let's move it to 3. It won't really make that big of a difference. It requires your normal summon. It's a very powerful normal summon, but it's just susceptible to like everything. So let's just see what happens. But interestingly enough, Sky Striker Mecha Widow Anchor going to 3 would be rather curious, because think about it. Sky Striker just won one of the biggest online tournaments during quarantine, and it has a very interesting matchup against the current metagame. It's not Engage, but it's another resource that they can have in their toolbox to just give them another edge and actually give them a chance to compete, because a lot of people thought Engage was just the nail in the coffin, but here it is winning an event, and I think that is really cool. So if Sky Striker kind of fills this like interesting tier 2/rogue niche that like competes with the top decks, I think that's okay. Some people might have PTSD from the last few years of Sky Striker, but I think it would be cool to see Sky Striker still being able to go toe-to-toe in like the top 5, like top 10-ish decks, because overall, without Engage, I think the deck is like relatively fair, a very solid control deck, and a deck that a lot of people do like to play. But ultimately, this is purely subjective and my opinion, but I wanted to base this off of as much information as we have that is out there. I think the biggest point to underscore here is that we need a ban list. We cannot wait until we return to physical play to receive a ban list, because think of how disenchanted the player base already is knowing that this is the format they have to look forward to once physical play actually does return at any given point. And that's assuming we get it, but let's assume it does. Then why would you not create a format that people are excited to return to? You know, with tons of different decks, tons of variety, brand new cards, there could be so much excitement and newly injected passion and enthusiasm in the game if we get a new ban list. We need the ban list to correct the format now so that when we return to Yu-Gi-Oh, things are going to be even better. So guys, that's it for the video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about any of your ban list predictions going into June 2020. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.